All right, pilots, we're here for another beginner's guide, and we're going to jump into the TF-51D, which looks like a Mustang because it is a Mustang. This is the civilian Mustang, so it has no armament in it, but this is the second plane you get for free when you download DCS, along with the SU-25T Frogfoot. So we might as well jump into the TF-51, show you what it looks like, what the stuff means, the key bindings, and how to fly it. It's the same as the Mustang except lighter, because the P-51 Mustang, of course, is going to have a little bit more weight to it because it has bullets and bombs and all kinds of stuff. So here we go. Let's jump in the cockpit. It's very simple, and there's not a whole lot to it. You got your manifold pressure and your RPMs. These are going to be two very important gauges. Your suction for running all your steam gauges. Your coolant temperature, your radiator, your carburetor temperature. You won't need to worry about these so much, but it is nice to know where they are and see where the green is. This is where they should be running, roughly. So this is an important one down here. So this is your oil pressure on the bottom left. And this is your fuel pressure on the bottom right. And this is your oil temperature on the top. So this is a very important gauge, because this is the one you're going to have to keep your eye on to manage your engine, so you don't brick it out and shell it. So you need your oil temperature to be up here in the green to make sure it's hot enough that the oil is thin enough that the oil pressure is down here. When you first start it up and the oil's cold, then your pressure is going to be high, so you can't run the RPMs very high until it starts warming up. But once you're flying and you're in flight and you're cruising and you got your throttles all set, you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. But when you start pushing the engine, that's when you got to worry about this gauge here. All right, your climb, ascent, and descent. This is your side slip. This is your ADI. This is your airspeed, which is in miles per hour, not in knots. This is your altitude. Okay, this is your HSI. And this is your clock. So the most important, well, and also this is also a compass, which you can kind of use this like your this is what you would use as your HUD heading tape. This is basically your heading tape, but you just got to remember it's kind of reversed. Like when you're turning right, the compass is going to turn the other direction, but just worry about the numbers. All right, looking over here to the right, we have our radio. For the most part, you're just gonna, once you get your airplane started, you're just gonna put it on A. Most of the time. Come over here and don't worry about this. We can skip it. This is a beginner's guide. We're not going to get super in-depth in everything. This is like my other beginner's guides. We're just going to get you going and give you enough knowledge to be dangerous. All right, so here is your electronics. This one over here is your battery, the first one on the left. I'm sorry, the farthest one on the left is your generator, and the one next to it is the battery. So these are your two main switches. This is what you need to turn on to operate the airplane. The next one is your gun heat, and the other one after this is pitot heat. So if it's cold, you need to be running your heats. This is your lights. So if you go up, it's bright. Middle is off. Down is dim. Don't worry about the other three at the bottom. Don't got to worry about it. Well, I mean, I guess you can see it there. It's just the colors and the steadies for them. This is your oxygen. You can see it defaults to on, and you can tell the oxygen is flowing because the blinker is going. If you're at a lower altitude, you don't need to run the oxygen, but it stays on default. You don't have to mess with it. You can shut it off by hitting the valve, but you don't have to worry about it. Just leave it on as default and never even worry about it. All right, coming into the middle is this weird looking gauge here. So this is your fuel. So if you have your fuselage tank, and then you've got your wing tanks, and then these last two that say RH, LH combat drop tanks, that's if you put external fuel tanks on here. So you have to select your tank. So you want to run your wing tanks first, and you can look it up if you want to know exactly how you do your fuel. But basically, you take off in the left tank, you warm up on your left tank, and then after so long in the air, I usually wait about 5 to 8 minutes. I'll switch over here to the right tank and just start running them down until they get low, and then you can go into the fuselage tank, the main tank, when your wing tanks are about out. You're supposed to time it out so you know for sure, but you probably don't have to worry about that for the most part. This is your fuel shutoff. When you're ready to start the plane, you got to turn your fuel on. That's all it is. You don't have to worry about your gun sight and all your weapon stuff because you do not have weapons. Parking brake, you'll need this one. Parking brake, you pull your brakes in, you put on the brake, and then you let your brake pedals off, and then you release the park brake, and then you're locked in. And you want to set that before you start the plane, because you don't want to start rolling right away. All right, this is your magnetos. You have two magnetos that run your piston engines. Think of it like a coil, or yeah, like a coil basically. I don't know why I can't think of the name of it all of a sudden. You know, old gassed engines. You've got the pins that your spark plugs hook onto to send the signal to your spark plugs. Just think of the magnetos like that. So you have to have them both turned on when you're ready to start. Over here you got your starter. This is your primer for before you start. This is your fuel booster. You turn this on before you start going. This is your oil dilute to dilute the oil down, to thin it out. Come over here to the left. You've got two throttles on these old planes. So the one on the left is your RPM throttle. The one on the right is your throttle. Now if you look over here, your RPM throttle is this one right here. And when you're cruising slow or just cruising at normal speed and not pushing the odor, you run the RPMs at 2,400 RPM. So right there at the edge of the green. And you control that with this little lever here. And when you're going to go and push the motor and cruise as quick as you can without damaging the motor, you can take your RPMs up to 2,700 right here. Now this throttle is going to change your manifold pressure right here. When you're going as slow as you, if you're going to throttle it back to just cruise, when you're at 2,400, you can also bring your manifold pressure right down to 3,600. Or you can just say 36. And that would be right there. When you're up to 2,700 RPMs on the RPM gauge and you're pushing the engine but not damaging it, you can take your manifold pressure all the way up to 46 at that RPMs. If you're really pushing the engine and also damaging it, so you can't do it for very long, you can take the RPMs from 2,700 to 3, or leave it at 2,700, and you can push your manifold pressure up to like 51, 55. If you look over here, this tells you everything you need to know. So here's your RPMs: cruise 24 and 36, which is what I just said there. 24 there and 36, right on the edge of the greens. Max continuous, so 2746. That way you're not damaging the engine. Everything above that, you're damaging the engine. So you have to be very careful. And if you're pushing your manifold pressure past 61, you're going to have to use your wartime emergency power, which is a button. Don't even worry about it in this one. That's advanced, so don't even worry about it. Just remember 24 and 36, the edges of the greens. And if you want to go faster or harder, you can go 46 and 27. After that, just know you're pushing it and you can't do it very long. All right, you got your trims. So you don't just have a trim hat in this. You've actually got buttons. So this is your trim aileron right here. This is your trim pitch. And this is your trim rudder. All right, these right here, these are your radiator cooler and oil cooler. So it controls the shutters on the outside of the plane that controls airflow to keep them cool. When you're just flying, you just leave it in automatic right where it is. But you can click that down, then you can go to full open, or you can go to closed. And then you just flip this back up to always go right back to automatic. And this right here is your carburetor. When you're getting ready to go, you just put the carburetor up and leave it. This is your flaps. Your flaps move in segments. So up, 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 and then down, 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 down. So you don't just move the flaps, you do it in little segments. So it gives you a lot of control. And then of course you can close and open the canopy. When you close the canopy, you do have a mirror that you can just reach up and click on it. Just like you're reaching up with your hand, and just pull the mirror down so you got a mirror. Alright, so that is the basic standard familiarization with the cockpit and a little bit about the engine. Let's go ahead and get into the keybinds that you're going to need to fly this thing. So there's not a whole ton of keybinds, but they are important. You'll need, first we'll go to the axes. We're going to say you have a HOTAS. So pitch and roll. So that's your ailerons and your elevators. Then you've got up here engine RPM setting. This is that little throttle that has the P on it that controls your engine RPMs. So I have my throttle is a double, so I just split my throttles. So I've got my left throttle as the RPM throttle, and I've got my right throttle as the throttle. And then, of course, whatever you use for your rudder, here's where you would put it, the pedals. And if you have toe brakes on your pedals, this is where you would click on those to do left brake, right brake. I do not have pedals myself. I am a disabled guy, so I don't use pedals. I might try to use them when I finally get some, but I don't have any to even try right now, so we're not going to get into that. So this is going to be all you need for your axes. So let's go into regular flight controls if you do not have axes. So you want your aircraft left and right bank, your up and down, which would be your pitch, and then your rudders would be right here. Now we'll come down here, and for your trim, you've got left and right aileron trim, and it would just be, I use my trim hat on my joystick, and you can use whatever controls you want, and it just moves that dial that was down there I showed you, and then the elevators up and down. And then I've got bound my trim rudder, because in a Warbird you're going to have to trim the rudder because of the torque that the piston engine puts out, puts a lot of pressure on the airframe. So when you're on the ground and you're taking off, when you're throttling up that engine, it's going to torque the plane to the side. So if you don't have that rudder trimmed, the tail's going to try to spin around on you. So you want to trim and every aircraft has a different trim setting for takeoff, and we'll go through that for each aircraft when we're doing these guides. So we'll do it here when we're getting ready to take off. I've got my flaps, so flaps up, flaps down, and it'll just click with the flaps. So up, 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 and that'll keep bringing the flaps up, because I'm using my flap lever on my hostess, and it's got a middle, which is where it sits, and then there's up and down. Alright, so we got the trim hat. Now I use a left and right brake as a button on my hostess. I use my DMS. And you'll need your left and right brake, because when you're rolling on the ground, when you're taxiing, you're going to use your differential braking. So if you're rolling forward and you give it a little left brake, that's going to cause the aircraft's left wheel to kind of stutter and slow down a lot, while the right one's still freewheeling, which is going to cause your tail to start swinging around to the right. So that's how you're going to steer. But you also can steer a little bit with the rudders, with the pedals, just not very far. It'll steer a little bit, but you'll use your differential braking a lot until you get moving. Once you're moving forward at a decent speed and you bring the tail up off the ground, then your rudder has complete control. And of course, wheel brakes. I do not have pedals, so I have to use my button here, which is kind of rough. Having a button for brakes is not the best thing, because you can't use pressure, so you just have to lightly tap the brake. You can't just hold it down, because you'll flip the front of the airplane down. You'll bury the engine into the ground real quick. I've got my zoom view, and we'll keep on scrolling up. So landing gear, I've just got my landing gear up down on a single button. That's the same button on every single plane I fly, and helicopters that have landing gear that retracts. It's always this button. Then we got our flaps. We already did the flaps. We don't need that one. Communications, I just have that as a button so I can bring up my comm menu really quick, but usually I have it on the keyboard because I don't use the comm menu that much. Okay, I got canopy open and close as this button that has a middle and then a forward and a back, because you can stop your canopy and you don't have to open or close it all the way. And a lot of times when you're taking off in real life, they don't have the canopy all the way closed until they're actually up in the air and they have taken off. Mainly because they can stick their head out the window a little bit to get a better view. If you haven't noticed, when you're on the ground, you don't have a very good view. Some of the aircraft, like a P-47 Jug, have like no view. So back into the keybinds. So there's the canopy. And that's just about it. Everything else we're going to do, we can do just by clicking in the cockpit. So let's start this thing, right? We got to get it to start warming up anyway. So first thing we do is we're going to put the RPM throttle all the way up. We're going to peg it. Now we're not going to touch that until we're up in the air. Carburetor is already on. Turn on the fuel. Turn on the generator and the battery. Now you can see we got power. You can hear everything coming to life. The fuel's already on. We got it. We're on left. We're good there. Fuel booster is on. We're not ready to hit the starter, but it's flanged. So we're going to go ahead and get both magnetos turned on. We're about ready to kick this sucker. Brake, checking the park brake, it's on, so we're good there. So now we just hit the primer and we hold it down for a few seconds. That's all we need, and that's it. Now, this red knob is your fuel mixture. It just needs to go down once to be in run. That is all. So you just right click this baby once. You can hit it again to go into like the emergency power to make it really rich. It's the rich mixture, but you don't have to, don't really mess with it. Just go to run when you're ready. So we give it a little bit of throttle, right? What we're going to do is we're going to hold the starter up until it starts kicking over, and once it kicks over, we're going to come over here, and we're going to, with the left click being held down, holding that up, we're just going to right click this button to put the mixture on once it kicks over. And that's it. Here we go. And then we're also, once it starts up, we're going to probably back the throttle a little bit and try to get our RPMs down to about 1,000. 1,000, 1,100, somewhere in there, so we start warming up. So here we go. Click that down, let off the starter. Now we're going to slowly bring the throttle down a little bit. And you can see our RPMs are about 1,100, so that's good. Now we're just going to sit here. And you can see our oil pressure is pretty high. So we got to wait until that oil pressure comes down, and it'll start coming down with the temperature going up. And that's it. Now we just play the waiting game while we're warming up. We're not even going to taxi yet because I don't want to put any stress on the engine yet while it's still warming up. Once you get up to about 45 or 50 and the oil pressures come down a little bit, you can go ahead and taxi at least to the front of the runway, but don't take off right away. You want to give it a little bit longer. Also, you can see our carburetor temperature is right where it should be. The coolant temperature is not very high because we just started. We can go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead and set our trim while we're letting it warm up so we're not just sitting here waiting. So, when we're taking off, when you take off, you're going to throttle up slowly. You're going to keep your RPM maxed, and you're just going to slowly use the throttle to increase your manifold pressure up to about 51. And I mean slowly. If you spike the throttle too hard when you're taking off, you're going to torque the hell out of the plane. It's going to make it really hard to take off. So, you start flying, or you start going down the runway, and you're going to be holding probably back on the stick depending on what you're flying because that locks the tail wheel. Once you start going a little bit of speed, you go to neutral. Once you get going, I want to say around, I can't remember exactly the speed, but usually I'm doing close to 80 to 100 miles per hour when I start to give it a little forward stick. And what that'll do is that'll lift the tail up off the runway. And once that happens, then you have full control of your aircraft with the rudder pedals, which means you can finally get going a little bit straighter, hopefully. As long as you don't get the wobbles going, which you can control that by not getting on the throttle so fast. You don't have to be in a big hurry. Slowly increase your throttle. We'll try to do this takeoff as smooth as we can to show you how easy it can be. But I screw it up myself quite a bit. Alright, so first rudder is the nose. We're going to give it a little forward, which is pitching the nose down, which helps you when you're taking off. I usually make sure I don't get too far forward to where I can't see yellow anymore. So somewhere around here is starting, so I just go right about to here, and that's pretty good. Aileron trim, you don't have to worry about aileron trim, just leave it. But you could if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. You don't need to. The rudder is the most important one, so you need right rudder with this airplane. And we're going to try to, we don't have a loadout because we are a civilian plane. We don't have ammo in here either, so we're pretty light. And we're not full on gas, and we don't have any bags on here, so we're just going to give it a little bit of right rudder. Somewhere right about in there should be good. So again, we're going to line up. We're going to try to get completely straight before we get going. And then we're going to slowly increase our manifold pressure while maybe using a little bit of differential braking to keep it straight on the runway. And then when we get up our manifold pressure up to 51, right here, then we're no longer going to mess with the throttle. And we're just going to pay attention to how straight we are. When we start going fast, we're going to give it a little bit of forward stick. Not a ton. If you bury it, yeah, you know what's going to happen. So you just give it a little bit, kind of doing like this, just kind of giving it a little bit. You'll feel the tail come up. Just hold it there once the tail comes up until you get up to about 150 miles an hour, and then we're going to go back to neutral and slowly start rotating. And you're just going to lift off the ground. No big movements. This is all very minute movements. Just a little forward, slowly coming back. Piece of cake, right? So where are we at on our temp? So our oil pressure is coming down. We're still not quite in the green, but that's because we're not hot enough. But we are warm enough to start increasing our RPMs to let it warm up a little bit quicker. Now, once you're flying, you are going to control your RPMs more with this secondary. But when you're on the ground, you just peg it and do everything with your manifold pressure, your throttle. Once you're in the air, your RPMs are going to be kind of high because you have it pegged. And that's when you're just going to pull it back until you read about 2,700. And then once you get enough airspeed, you'll go back down to 2,400 with the left throttle. And your right throttle will be what you fly with most of the time, and that's going to control your manifold pressure. Bouncing between 36 and 46, depending on how much power you need. All right, let's taxi. So we're going to close the canopy up at least a little bit. We're going to click our flaps all the way up, and then I go one down for takeoff. No, if I have no load, I go one down. If I have a heavy load, if this was a P-51 Mustang and I had bombs or something, I'd go 2 or 3 flaps down. And also, once we get lined up and we're ready to go, we will uncage the ADI. I don't like doing it too early because then you've got to recage it and uncage it again because it'll, when you're bouncing around on the ground, it might set it off a little bit, make it a little crooked. All right, so we're going to hold down the brake, and that'll automatically take off the parking brake. We're going to throttle back a little bit now because it doesn't take much power to start rolling. And there we go. So we can use our rudder pedals here to turn ever so slightly. It's not much. It's very little. And then differential braking, we're just going to tap on the left brake here a little bit. Just like that. And now we can just use our pedals because we've got the nose looking down the runway somewhat. And if you need to, you just tap the left brake a little bit and coax it right on over. There we go. That looks pretty lined up, so I'm going to kill the throttle completely now, and I'm going to start tapping my brake, because if I hit the brake, it's going to, see what I mean? See how the tail started coming up right away? You got to be real careful. So now, holding down the brake, parking brake, let go of the brake, and there we go. Now we're all good again. Let's get our throttle back up to about 1,500 RPMs. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off unless I wreck and blow up. But we're going to take off, and then we're going to just fly the circuit right on back around, and then we're going to land. And I will describe the landing on the way back around. And I've already described the takeoff, so as soon as our oil pressure is pretty good, which it's getting there, just need a little bit more heat. And also what we can do is we can come down here and we can close the oil. That's going to help it heat up a little bit quicker. Also, when you're flying around and you've been pressing the engine a little bit, and maybe you've been dogfighting or you've had to gain a bunch of altitude and your oil is kind of hot, it's past the green a little bit, what you can do is just come down here and open it. And just watch it cool off really quick. And then when it's done cooling off, you can just hit that to go back to auto. So if you see me flying the P-51 Mustang in a video or on stream, I'm going to be doing that quite a bit when I'm flying around a lot because I'm going to be stressing the engine from time to time, and that's going to make the oil get hot. Alright, so let's close the oil. So now you can see we're running a lot higher RPMs and pressure, and the oil is not bouncing out of the red yet. So we're almost ready to really start taking off. We're almost at 60. Once we take off, the engine will be nice and warm. But I always wait until I'm at least at 60 before I attempt to take off, because I don't want to stress the engine out. Alright. We're going to turn on the oil shutters. Close the canopy completely. Lock her in. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm holding down the brake. Now we can check the parking brake is off. We're going to do another check. Everything's good. Everything's where it should be. Trim is set. Carburetor's open. Oh, we forgot to turn on our radio. See? We forgot something. Everything else is good. I guess we can turn on our lights. Normally I don't, but we'll do it this time. we are going to use our mouse wheel to scroll that down. Now to relock it, you have to click on it with the mouse to pull it out, and then you lock it back up, moving the mouse wheel at the same time. But let's just open her up. So I'm going to let off the brake, and I'm going to start gradually giving it some throttle, and I'm going to use differential braking to try to stay as straight as I can. And here we go. So the manifold pressure is the one we're looking at. Okay, and the tail wheel is up. We're using our rudders now. I know I'm a little off the runway, but it happens. Now we're pulling back slowly and just a little bit. And the gear's coming up. The flaps are coming up. I'm going to decrease my RPM throttle down to about 2700, and I'm going to decrease my throttle down to about 46. So this is max continuous now. And we can check and see our gear is up. We are flying. And you see our oil temp is now in the green, and our pressure is a little high, but it's fine. It's not too high. Now we're just flying it like any other plane, except you will use the rudder a little bit more than a jet will, but for the most part you won't have to mess with your rudder too much in flight. Not as a beginner basic pilot. You can get into the more advanced flight techniques later on. So when we're coming into land, let's go ahead and come down to normal cruise now. So we're going to go down to 2400 RPM. You can tell by the way the engine sounds as soon as I come down. So it stops sounding like there's marbles banging around inside the engine now. And you can see our airspeed is 250 miles an hour, so we are cruising. And we're going to start coming down on the manifold pressure too, because we're going to start coming down to land. I'm going to bring my RPMs down to about 2,000 as well, because we're already going so fast. We're going to start losing some altitude because we're up here pretty high. I'm going to come down on the flaps once. As soon as we start slowing down more, I'll bring in more flaps. So I just put the throttle all the way back to 0. And that's why you hear the gear alarm going off, because the gear is up right now. Alright, we're going to 150 miles an hour. We're going to bring the flaps all the way down, and we're going to bring the gear down, which is going to slow us down even more. I'm going to start giving it some throttle because we don't want to go slower than 150 miles an hour right now. Although you can come in and, well, to be honest, we can come in a little bit slower. Like I said, we don't have a bunch of bullets in here or a ton of gas, so we can slow it down a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fly down to the runway. We're not worried about some kind of on-speed setup like that. We're just going to kind of gradually fly down here to the runway. When we get down to the runway, we are going to flare and float like we do everything else when we're learning how to land it. And then we're going to go to full idle, and we're going to let the plane come down on its own, except we're going to try to keep at an angle on it so that the back wheel lands at the same time as the front wheels do. It's called a 3-point landing. That's what we're shooting for. It might make you bounce a little bit. Just hold up the stick a little bit and wait. And then pull back on the stick again when you're getting ready to drop all the tires down. So here we go. We're flaring and floating. I have no throttle left in. I'm pulling back now. There you go, that little tiny hop, and now the stick's all the way back to keep the wheels on the ground. I'm going to peg the RPMs fully forward, but we're going to keep the regular throttle all the way back. And I'm just using my differential braking now to kind of start slowing down. And there you are, folks. Now the P-51 Mustang with all the guns, bombs, and all the goodies, it flies the exact same way. It's a little bit heavier because of the stuff, but everything works the same. The only difference is going to be The weapons selections here actually do stuff, and you'll have a gun sight mounted right here where you see this bracket. So there'll be a little HUD right here that's your gun sight. It doesn't have HUD information or anything like that, but it does have a holographic gun sight on it. And when we do the P-51 Mustang, we'll go through that. And thank you for hanging out with this video. I hope it helps you some way. This will get you flying your Recon TF-51D civilian Mustang. And you all have a very, very good night.